Welcome back to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Beth Ladd. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, Beth, we connected as a result of another previous guest on the B2B Leadership Podcast, Kathleen Lee Lawarchik. And I want to say a special shout out to Kathleen. Thank you so much for introducing us. We had a blast connecting, and I'm super excited to have you on. You're the VP of Innovation at the American Supply Association and the teacher of human-centered design and entrepreneurship. And you got a lot of things on your plate and knew a lot of things and incredible experience. So first, I want to ask, tell us a little bit about what is human-centered design. And when you say I'm a teacher of human-centered design, what exactly does that mean?
Sure. So I think human-centered design probably became fairly popular in modern vernacular, maybe 10 years ago, give or take. Design thinking, human-centered design, all of those terms are bantered about. But I think the reality is many of us, myself included, were doing or utilizing the tenets of human-centered design long before we knew that that's what it was supposed to be called. So, ideally, human-centered design is the practice of developing empathy for the humans who are going to use the product or service that you're trying to design to solve some kind of a problem for those people. So you've found an audience or a group of people. They've got some kind of a challenge that needs to be solved, one that they may or may not even be aware of, but maybe one you've observed. And so now you're going to spend some time really trying to understand that challenge and see it through their eyes and through their experiences, which is the empathize part. Then you spend some time doing ideation. So you think about how all the ways you could solve that problem. Then you analyze your ideas. Sometimes your ideas are really great, but they're just too expensive, or, the right pieces of the puzzle just don't exist yet. Now might not be the time. Or maybe you found something new and exciting that seems so simple and straightforward, you don't know why no one else has done it before. Then you build a few prototypes, go through some iterative prototypes, and then hopefully present that as a potential solution. So that, in a nutshell, is human-centered design.
Oh, that's really cool. And that pairing with entrepreneurship and pairing with your role as VP of Innovation at the American Supply Association all makes sense. It's like all these things came together and they all roll into each other, right? And so does the topic of leadership, which is the core of what we're going to dig into today. So I know you have had a lot of experience from the leadership perspective as, going up through the ranks in various companies, working for small organizations, large organizations. And there was one particular area you and I discussed before that I want to dig into most, which is around some of the fears that exist as we progress through our leadership career. I was wondering if you could start out with the first stage, and when someone is just getting into career, what might some of those fears be? And then we'll get into how they progress over time.
Sure. So I think, I spend a lot of my time and have spent a lot of my time for the last 8 to 10 years working with new young professionals. So college age or first job, those kinds of folks. So I've had a fairly intimate seat to watch this up close and personal, again, for another time in my life, because it's been a minute since I was in that position. But the first thing that I observe, particularly with young folks who are new to work, is a very strong sense of imposter syndrome. I've gone to school, I've learned some things, maybe I've had an internship or an apprenticeship of some kind, and my head tells me that I have skills and knowledge, and there are things there that I could bring to bear to be a great contributor to whatever my role is. But that little voice way down in the back of my head says, you don't know what you're doing. You don't have any experience. Nobody's going to want you. And even if they mistakenly hire you, you won't have anything to contribute anyway. It won't really matter. And that, I think that's really prevalent in a lot of folks early on in their career, as they're trying to figure out how to sort of get their feet underneath them, if you will, and build some confidence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, after a conversation, we were talking about this point, and even just now, I was reflecting on, my first time in career. I remember that time very vividly, and I remember those exact words you just said. They weren't so quiet in my head, though. It was a refrain that I had to battle every single day, and I still do a lot of times. And on
Me
the
too.
topic of right, and so on the topic of imposter syndrome, right? Sometimes we think of this as only being something you might face early in your career, but in reality, I mean, I've faced it throughout my entire career, and you probably have too, right? And in my belief, and I'd love your feedback on this, is that anytime you are going to do something new, like something you haven't done a million times before, you're probably going to feel like an imposter. And you know what? It's actually a good thing, because it shows, it's a signal that you are pushing yourself outside of what you already know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, a friend, colleague, and mentor of mine several years ago said to me, there's no comfort in the growth zone, and there's no growth in the comfort zone.
Mm.
And I think that's really true, and a sort of partner statement, right, to this idea of imposter syndrome. Certainly, as we move along, either could be in your career, could be in your personal life, could be trying a new hobby, could be going to a place you've never been before where you're intimidated, whatever, right? I think everybody feels at some point that I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know why I thought I could do this. I don't even know what this is exactly that I am supposed to be doing. I think we all feel that. I think the sort of the benefit, if you will, of growing, I'm not gonna say, well, not growing older, but having more experience, is that when that feeling comes, I think one of the most important things you can do, Brene Brown talks about this in one of her books, and I really like the imagery that she gives, is that you don't try to banish that. That's crazy. You can't banish feelings, and you shouldn't pretend like that feeling isn't there. Instead of pretending like it's not there, or trying to pretend like you can get rid of it, give it a seat right up there in the stands, put a label on it that says, right, imposter syndrome, and tell it to sit in the chair so you know where it's at and you can keep your eye on it. And
That's powerful.
you know what it is, you name it, and you tell it, that's your chair, sit right there. I know you're coming to the party. There's nothing I can do about that.
Mhm.
But recognize you for what you are. And once you know what it is, and you can say, I felt that before, and I got through it before, and I know it's a truth, but it's not the truth, then you can move past it. And I think experience hopefully helps to give you some of those tools to say, get up there and sit in your chair. I got this. Will it be perfect? Will it be effortless? Probably not, but I got this.
That's incredibly powerful. And I love that imagery of giving it a place, right? Because if we don't give it a place, it's just going to rule the space inside your head and do whatever it wants. But if we give it a place, you can put it right in its place. And I also love what you said about, recognizing that you have gotten through things like this before. And that's one of my favorite exercises to take leaders through when they're facing a new challenge they've never been before, is I often ask them, well, tell me about a time you faced a challenge where you had no idea what to do. Could be in your personal or professional life, doesn't matter. And you got through it anyways. And without a doubt, every single time I've asked this question, every single time I've taken a leader or hundreds of leaders through this in like a conference type of presentation, the stories that come out are all inspiring. They're just absolutely amazing. And I turn around and say, cool, now what was it that allowed you to get through that? And they start pulling apart the pieces, and all of a sudden they come up with this recipe, and they know exactly how to get through this thing, which they've never done, but based on their experience of having accomplished things before. And it's fascinating how fast we forget, right? We forget our successes, we forget our wins, we forget the big accomplishments in our life. We forget what it was like to be in that growth zone. And it's really important to take a step and let that imposter syndrome have a seat, and then look to the past and find out, how did you do this before?
Right. And like you said, and remember that you have done this before, and that if if having done it before, having succeeded before is an indicator of a previous or a future recipe for success, well, there you go.
There you go. That's right. Okay. So now, early in career, let's say we gain some experience, we have some skills, we have a market, hopefully demand for our skill set. What's the next kind of major stage, and what's some of the fear that we might experience at that point in time?
Well, this is, I think, for me, with the folks that I've led in the past, one of the most difficult ones to get past, which is that change is bad, and everyone knows that. So we don't want to change anything. We've gotten to this point in our career where we finally got some equilibrium. We feel like we have made contributions. We are making contributions. Things are just humming along. And now you want me to do what? It's so difficult to get past a mindset of why, when what you're looking for is a mindset of why not?
Great point. I mean, why not in those cases? It can't. Okay, so if you're faced with a challenge where you are asking why, or you're in an environment where the status quo has been upended, perhaps in the first, we're here, a little while after this recording, but in the first quarter of 2023, the whole, especially the tech world, went sideways, completely sideways. Right? It was like just going back to the beginning of COVID 3 years prior in 2020. And in those cases, what is it really as simple as that mindset of why not? Because there was a lot of change that had to be driven very, very quickly in order to adapt to the economic environment that people were living in, just like it was during COVID. So is it as simple as that mindset piece of why not?
I don't know if it's as simple as that, but that's certainly, I think, a key ingredient of looking at and analyzing where you are and the situation you're in, the challenges that you're faced with, and saying to yourself, if you recognize something has to change, something's going to change, something is changing. If you want to be a positive part of that, if you want to carry that forward for yourself in a way that's positive emotionally and psychologically for yourself, then saying why not is a much more positive way forward than why.
Yeah, I mean, just
one of them, it just is negative, inherently negative, and I think it locks you into a mental spiral that's very, very difficult to get out of once you're in. It's not always easy to say, okay, I get it. I'm a little uncomfortable with it, but if I'm being honest, it's really just because I haven't seen it or touched it or experienced it yet.
Yeah.
And when I do, it'll be whatever it's going to be, but I'm not right. I'm going to choose not to prejudge that. I'm going to choose to go forward and make my contributions and give it the best effort that I can give it. And if it doesn't work, well, guess what? There'll probably be more change. So it'll be all right.
That's the only constant, right? I talk about this a lot inside the B2B Leaders Academy, that there is only one constant in leadership, only one constant in our lives too. It certainly applies. And that is that change will happen. I guess there's two, they're kind of related. Change will happen and problems will occur.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you have tools to help address the problems, you're golden. Then you could literally face any change that presents any number of problems and feel 100% in control, or at least, keeping the imposter syndrome feeling at bay, putting it in its seat, and then staying in control and navigating the course, because the only guarantee is that another problem is going to come up as soon as you get off the phone with whoever you're talking to right now. Right. Exactly. And another problem is going to come up tomorrow. And another problem is going to come up the next day. Right. So in the mindset, the psychology, I think, plays such a big part, which you're getting at with the why not. Right. One word distinguishes a vastly different feeling from why, and being apprehensive and kind of defensive, to why not being potentially assertive and being in a place of extreme, a totally other extreme with power and confidence. And it's just one simple word and a little intonation, and it has the power to change everything. I just absolutely love that. All right, so we progress through, mid-career, right? Now we've overcome, let's say, our fear of change, and we've recognized that things are going to change. That's okay. We have acquired a number of tools. We are leading teams, perhaps multiple teams at this point. And also later in career, there's another type of fear or another situation that you've seen come up, and tell us a little bit about that.
So this is the one that always makes me smirk a little bit.
Me too.
This is the cynic, right? I've been here, and we've all worked with the cynic. I've been here for 30 years. This is not my first rodeo. I've seen all this and heard it all before. This all, right? I know exactly what's going to happen next. You just listen to me and it's all going to be okay. Just follow along, right? And no, I don't need to hear your ideas, because whatever they are, I've heard them before, probably 20 years ago, and dismissed them then because they were stupid then and they're foolish now. So you just follow along, little girl, and it's all going to be okay. And this is, and in fairness, right? Some of these folks are so inundated by this that, and very well meaning. They're not. It doesn't have to be mean. I think for me, that's the saddest part, is when I've encountered these folks who they're not being mean. They mean sincerely mean. I've seen it all. I know. Just come with me. Follow me, it'll be fine, right? It's always like, I've seen it all, just come, just do what I tell you to and keep your head down. They're very well meaning in many cases, but the reality is what you're saying to yourself and the message that you're sending to others is that there's nothing new under the sun, that you have nothing to learn, that, and more, and worse yet, you're not interested in learning from a colleague, a partner, a friend, a family member, a significant other, choose your relationship. But the reality is that you're saying, I'm not interested in anything that you have to say, because you can't possibly say anything that I don't already know. And there's an arrogance there that's can be dangerously unhealthy, mentally as well as emotionally, and certainly probably won't bode well for your relationships.
In any form or fashion, personal or professional, right? Yeah, I've seen this firsthand, not quite as much in some of the roles that I had inside of companies, but as a leadership coach, I've had lots of experiences working with people all different levels, manager, director, VP, C-level. And, I've had lots of conversations, 10x the number of conversations that people actually worked with. And there's always this element, and I can sense it pretty well now, when they're like, what do you know that I don't? Nope, you don't know anything that I don't. I'm not going to work with a coach, or I'm not working with you. And I tell them very frankly that, look, my role as a coach is not to tell you what to do. 100%, that's not it. Right? I have frameworks, I have tools, I have questions, I have things, I have experiences, but I am not here to tell you what to do. And if they aren't open to looking at things a different way, to look at how they present to their team, look at how they show up, how they build the identity of the team and organization that they run, then in a different way than they ever have before, then there's no point, right? There's no possible way it would be a fruitful relationship for either of us, and there's no possible way they will grow either. So it's really fascinating that comes so much later in career, when the contrary is what you would think would happen, which is you have this great resource and all this experience to share, but if you go too far overboard, then you end up in the cynical seat.
You do indeed. But, as you pointed out, there's it's a self-limit, we'll call it a self-limiting prophecy for a leader, because if you don't believe that you have anything to learn from anyone else, then you also don't believe that you have anything to learn about yourself.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
Whether that's a counselor's, whether you're working with a counselor or a coach or a mentor or whatever the title is of that person, or a peer for that matter, right, on the other side of the table. if you don't believe that that you have anything to learn and that they don't have anything valuable to contribute, then it would seem odd to me that you're willing to invest your most precious commodity, which is your time and attention, in a room with other people. I mean,
Yeah.
why don't you just go be by yourself all the time? If there's
There's a great question. Great question. Yeah, exactly. So across these, these big categories of fear that we've talked about here, early career, mid-career, later career, there are fundamental differences in terms of how men versus women adapt in these situations and show up in these situations. I'd be curious for your take on what you've seen and where some of the biggest challenges are for both sides. And I'll share my experience too, because I think it's a really important point that we do fundamentally approach these situations very differently oftentimes. And it can be really helpful to understand the other side.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I won't attempt to speak for the entirety of my gender, but I will speak for myself when I say that for me, as I look back on, on my journey up to this point in my career, whether that imposter syndrome, that fear of not being enough or having enough to contribute, really pushed me to work really, really hard. Mm-hmm. It pushed me to invest in myself, to invest a lot of hours in my work, to bring it home and bring it with me when I probably shouldn't have been, right, in ways that were unhealthy at times, because if you're not enough, then you can never give enough. And so I think for me, and I've certainly seen this in peers and other female counterparts, we tend to just give it, 135%, robbing from Peter to pay Paul, usually in our personal lives and personal relationships, in order to make up for those feelings of not enoughness. And many times, especially for me, when I spent the vast majority of my career in technology fields. And so very often, for me at least, I was the only woman in the room, the only woman on the team, the only woman, right? And so I never felt like, or I shouldn't say that, I often felt like that I didn't have a strong coaching voice, a woman who had been there before, who could talk to me and say, hey, I see what you're doing there and I get it, but have you considered, right, maybe moderating what you're taking from yourself and your children and your home and your family a little bit more, because I see you and you're doing what needs to be done and you're contributing in a way that's outstanding. And I would like to see you, give yourself a little grace. And I didn't always have that voice. I didn't consistently have that voice. And so I think I see this, like I said, I see this a lot, particularly with women. We just double down and work harder and more hours and all the things. And there's often not that voice of, I see you.
Yeah.
And without that, right, women in particular seek that. I know you, I see you, I recognize you. And without that, it's very difficult I think, for a woman to feel any sense of accomplishment or or develop a sense of peace early on with the quality of your contribution.
Yeah, and that's incredibly powerful. And thank you for being open and just sharing that. On the male side, my own personal experience, plus being a leadership coach for over a decade, it was always about, once you get to that point where you have some experience, then there was a level of confidence that probably usually bordered on arrogance. And I certainly dabbled in that from time to time, right? And saying there's no problem I can't solve. There's no company I can't join. There's just overboard on the confidence spectrum a little bit, right? But what I have historically seen in a leadership coach for over a decade is that the largest percentage of people who have been willing to raise their hand and ask for help that I've worked with have been women. And I've worked with a much smaller percentage of men, But I think it's that ability and willingness to ask for help that is fundamentally different between the two, that I personally have seen and I personally felt. It took me a long time to get comfortable asking for help, even in personal life or professional life. Now, like, it's the only thing I ask for. I have three coaches that I work with right now as I build everything in my business. Like, asking for help is the only strategy that I have, but it took me a long time to get here. And when I've talked to people about coaching and what I do in B2B Leaders Academy and whatnot, the male side tends to pass it off as, yeah, that's all stuff I know. I do this every day. And the female side is like, oh my gosh, like, you can help support me. You have some tools. I need some help. I want to get better. I don't know how to do these things. I'm open. Right. And it's just fascinating. Right.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that, thousands of years of sort of biology and experience and social norms have landed us in a place where oftentimes an individual who feels insecure is willing to ask for help, in this case, women, right? And an individual who feels confident, perhaps falsely confident, wouldn't consider asking for help, nor, by the way, would that individual consider offering help to anyone else that appeared to be struggling. And I think there's particularly the way you describe it, right? I think there's a sort of a self-recognition and a level of self-maturity there that's being demonstrated in that says, hey, I've reached a point where I have some skills and I have some experience to offer, and I would like to be able to give that back. I think there's definitely a point in people's careers where they reach a certain level of maturity, and they're either going to, something clicks and you want to turn around and give back. Hence the reason in my spare time, I teach, because I think it's really, really important to give that back. I remember when I was there, I remember how it felt. I remember how confused I was. And I want to offer something back to this upcoming generation and classes. And then some people just never get there. There's something that doesn't happen for them, and they don't need any help. Maybe maybe they feel arrogant about it. Maybe they don't, but they're good. They don't need any help. And they certainly don't have time to offer it to anyone else because they're busy being magnificent.
They're busy being magnificent. I love that. That's perfect. All right. So we've talked about, fear and the changes that happen progressing from early stage career, mid stage, later stage. We talked about the difference between how men and women handle these situations and comfort level with asking for help. And when it comes to leadership, like, nobody has this figured out. That's the secret, right? And that's one of the things that I think people, when they get to a place and they see some of the quote unquote behind the curtains of what goes on, and you realize that, like, there are strategies and tools that work, and there's a lot of things that don't, and there's a way forward, but it's going to be different for every single person. And that's one of the most important things that I share inside the B2B Leaders Academy is, look, these are frameworks, these are tools, but your situation is unique. So our job is to figure out how to take these tools and then apply them to your specific and unique situation. Then they become your tools. Otherwise, they're just going to stay my tools, and we both know that's not going to end up well. And that feels like it's similar in nature to what you do with your group of students that you work with, and bringing them along is you're empowering them with tools to not only solve the problems that you need to do while they're in your program today, but also give them tools for the future. And there was one student that came back to you a little while ago after many, many years. Would you mind sharing a quick little story on that? Because it was really powerful.
Sure. So one of the things that I do with my student teams that I work with is I believe that leaders are readers, and in order to grow yourself, you have lots of tools to grow yourself, lots of ways to educate yourself, but one of them is reading. And so I will each semester with my student team, we'll read a book together and then discuss it, kind of the high points. And then so my students know that books and reading and reflecting and sharing together, right? I'm teaching them that process is something that's important to do. So it's not really a surprise to them that when they graduate, I give them a book for graduation. So several years ago, I gave this particular student probably one of my top 3 that I give to students that graduate, called How Will You Measure Your Life by Clay Christensen. And it's a wonderful sort of self-reflection about looking broadly at your life and your experiences and where you grew up and your hopes and your dreams and where you're going. And then thinking about the morals and values that you've developed up to this point and how those play or don't in the choices that you'll make going forward as you become whomever it is you're going to become. And as students do, they graduate and they go away. Some of them I have long-term relationships, and others I never hear from again. That's fine, right? I've planted the seeds I can plant, like a good farmer's daughter. And so it had probably been 4 or 5 years since I had heard from this particular student. He was one of the ones that graduated and was blessed to get a job, and off he went. And so a few weeks ago, a message popped up from him on LinkedIn, and he said, "Hey, Beth, I don't know if you remember me, but I worked with you a couple of years back, and you gave me a book when I graduated. And I took it around, and I've moved a couple times, and I've carried it around with me, but hadn't bothered to read it. I finally cracked it open the other day and read it, including your handwritten message in the front. And it was incredibly timely. There were a lot of messages in there that I needed to hear right now. And so I just wanted you to know I probably wasn't a very good teammate and haven't been a very good communicator, but I wanted you to know that I read the book and it mattered to me and I really appreciated it."
Wow. Wow. That's powerful. And to their point, the metaphor I love here that kind of lays this out is you planted seeds. You plant a seed. That's what we as leaders do, right? We plant seeds, we nurture those seeds, and we help them grow. Sometimes those seeds are ideas. Sometimes those seeds literally are roles. Sometimes they're people, but we plant seeds because we're always looking to the future. And that's just a perfect example that it may not come to fruition now. Something you do 4 years ago may not come to fruition until then, might not come to fruition until 10 years or 20 years down the track, but that's not why we do it. We don't do it for the gratification down the line. We do it to plant the seed and empower the other person. And that's just a wonderful, wonderful story that encapsulates that incredibly powerful leadership lesson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I certainly view the opportunities that I have to lead as a sort of a sacred trust, if you will.
Mhm.
I think the first step when you have a team is that it's important for you to get to know yourself. And I have some tools and frameworks, right, to help young professionals get to know themselves, and then to sort of put themselves in the context of their peers as well as me. What are my, Marcus Buckingham describes it as likes and loves and loathes, right? What do I love to do? What do I get, lost? I get in flow. If you read that book several years ago, and I just love this thing, right? But when I do these things over here, I really don't like them, or they really take all of my energy. I feel like, right, and then when I see my peer across the table, I can recognize that her loves are not mine, but together we're magical, right? And I think a big part of what we do as leaders is to provide opportunities for individuals to get to know themselves and each other within the context of work, friendships, projects, whatever it may be, right? And for them, obviously, to get to know us, because you shouldn't follow anyone who doesn't demonstrate their willingness to be transparent and vulnerable themselves, to let you truly get to know them, and then reinforce that through their behavior, not only what you observe them do, but your experiences with how they interact with you and the consistency of those experiences.
Yeah, we're in total alignment. As the first pillar in my leadership framework, and the start of everything is leading yourself. And it's really difficult to lead other people if you cannot lead yourself. And I'm with you 100%. So Beth, has been absolutely awesome time getting a chance to talk all things leadership, progression, fears, male, female. We covered a lot of topics. Thank you so much for your time. We'll include links to your profiles and company and information in the show notes. So be sure to check it out at b2bleadersacademy.com/podcast. Beth, thanks so much. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Nils. It was a great pleasure.